lecture, we will study about the topic evaporation. In the last lecture, what we have studied and this topic, we studied about the evaporation. What is the activity says? Add 2 spoons of salt to water in another beaker and stir it well. And do you see any change in the color of water? So what do you mean by evaporation? For understanding evaporation, we will prove the activity 6. And then we will add 2 spoons of salt to water in another beaker and stir it well. So firstly, we will take 2 spoons of salt. And then we will add this salt into the water. And do you see any change in the color of water? So if we put the salt into the water, then what we see? Can you see any salt in the beaker after stirring? And heat the beaker containing the salt water and let the water boil away and what is left in the beaker. So firstly, we will take a beaker and then we will add some salt into it. And can you see any salt in the beaker and after stirring and heat the beaker? Then firstly we will take some beaker and then we will add some salt into the beaker. And then after adding the salt into the beaker, then we will heat the beaker. Then we will heat the beaker containing the salt water and let the water boil away and what is left in the beaker. So firstly, we will take some beaker. Firstly, we will take beaker and then we will add some water into it. And then we will add some salt into it. Then after adding salt into the beaker, then what is the observation? Heat the beaker containing the salt water. Then we will heat the beaker containing the salt water and let the water boil away. Let the water boil away. And after boiling the water, what is left? Salt. As we know, water evaporates and salt is left. So water evaporates and salt is left into the beaker. So when we heat the water, then the water evaporates and then what is remain in the beaker? Salt. And this process is called evaporation. So the process, what do you mean by evaporation? The process of conversion of water into vapor is called evaporation. So the process of conversion of water into vapor is called evaporation. The process of evaporation takes place continuously wherever water is present. So what do you mean by evaporation? The process of conversion of water into vapors is called evaporation. And the process of evaporation takes place continuously wherever water is present. So what do you mean by evaporation? The process of conversion of water into vapor is called evaporation. And the process of evaporation takes place continuously wherever water is present. So this evaporation takes place continuously wherever water is present. So what do you mean by evaporation? The process of conversion of water into vapor is called evaporation. And this evaporation takes place continuously wherever water is present. When we heat the beaker, then evaporation rate is also, when we increase the temperature, then the evaporation rate also increases with the temperature. So with the temperature, evaporation rate is also increases. And where do you think salt comes from? So salt we use in the daily life. Where it comes from? It comes from the seawater. And what is the question? The salt we use in the daily life, where does it come from? It comes from the seawater. It comes from the seawater. As we know, the seawater contains many salt mixed in it, and one of these salt is the common salt. So the salt we use in the daily life, where does it come from? It comes from the seawater. It comes from the seawater. And as we know, seawater contains salt, and when we heat the beaker, then after heating the beaker, then when heat water is allowed to stand in shallow pits, then the water gets heated by the sunlight. So when seawater is heated, what is remaining left in the beaker? Then we heat the beaker, then what is remaining when seawater is allowed to stand in the shallow pits and water gets heated by the sunlight and slowly turns into the water vapor through evaporation. So as we know, in the salt, what is present in the seawater? What is present? Salt. In the seawater, salt is present, and one of these salt is the common salt. So common salt is present in the salt, and when seawater is allowed to stand in a shallow pits, water gets heated by the sunlight and slowly turns into the water vapor through evaporation. So what do you mean by evaporation? The process of conversion of water into vapor is called evaporation. And this evaporation takes place when its evaporation increases when temperature is increases. And where salt comes from? Salt comes from the seawater. When seawater is kept in the sunlight, then it evaporates, and what is remaining in that part, then the salt is remaining in that part. So common salt is obtained from the mixture of salt by this process. So this is the process of evaporation. So next is, this is a figure 5.12. How can we obtain salt from the seawater? So this is the 5.12 is the figure. How can we obtain salt from the seawater? So this is the process of obtaining salt from the seawater and use of more than one method of separation. We have studied some methods for separation of substances from their mixture. Often one method is not sufficient to separate the different substances present in a mixture. In such a situation, we need to use more than one of these methods. So use of more than one method of separation. So sometimes one method is not sufficient for separation. So we need 2 or 3 methods to separate different objects. So this is the activity 7. How can we separate sand and salt? What is the activity? How can we separate sand and salt? And how will we separate these? We already saw that hand picking note would be the practical method for separating these. So firstly, we will take a mixture of sand and salt. And how will we separate these? And we already saw that hand picking would not be practical method for separating these. So firstly, we will take a mixture of sand and salt. And how will we separate these? We already saw that hand picking note would not be a practical method for separating these. So what is the activity 7? Firstly, we will take a mixture of sand and salt. And how will we separate these? So how can we separate sand and salt? We already saw that hand picking would not be the practical method for separating these. So for separating sand and salt, we cannot use the method of hand picking. So how can we separate? Firstly, we will put sand and salt together into the beaker and we will add some water into it. So firstly, we will take a mixture of sand and salt into the beaker, and then we will add some water into it, and we will leave the beaker aside for the some time. Do you see the sand settling down at the bottom? And the sand can be separated by decantation or filtration. And what does the decanting liquid contain? Do you think that the water contains the salt which was there in the mixture at the beginning? So firstly, we will take the mixture of sand and salt. And how can we separate this mixture? We can separate this mixture with the, we cannot separate this mixture with the help of the hands, and keep this mixture in a beaker and add some water to it. Firstly, we will put this mixture in a beaker, and then we will add some water into it and leave the beaker aside for some time. Do you see the sand settling down at the bottom? And the sand can be separated by decantation and filtration. So how can we separate this mixture of sand and salt? We can separate the mixture of sand and salt by the process of decantation and sedimentation. And how can we separate this mixture? Firstly, we will put this mixture into a beaker, and then we will add some water into it. And do you see the sand settling down at the bottom? The sand can be separated by the decantation or filtration. And what does the decanting liquid contain? Do you think this water contains the salt which was there in the mixture at the beginning? Now we will need to separate salt and water from the decanting liquid and transfer this liquid in a kettle and close its lid. So firstly, we will take a mixture of sand and salt, and then we will add some water into it. And then if we add some water into it and leave the beaker for some time, do you see the sand settling down at the bottom? And then these can be separated by the process of decantation and filtration. What does the decanting liquid contain? Do you think this water contains the salt which was there in the mixture at the beginning? Now we need to separate salt and water from the decanting liquid and transfer this liquid to a kettle and close its lid and heat the kettle for some time. Do you see the steam coming out from the spout of the kettle as shown in the figure 5.13? And when the steam comes in contact with the ice or with the it forms liquid water. So how can we separate sand and salt? Firstly, we will put the sand and salt into the beaker, and then we will add some water into it. And after some time, sand settle down at the bottom, and then we separate sand and salt solution. And at the end, when we heat the salt solution, then the salt remains at the beaker and the water evaporates. So we can separate sand and salt with the help of sedimentation, decantation, and evaporation. So for separating mixtures, sometimes we need more than one method of separation. So this is the activity 7. How can we separate sand and salt? So this is a mixture. How can we separate sand and salt? Sand और salt को हम कैसे separate करते हैं? Sand और salt को हम पहले पानी में डालते हैं, बीकर में डालते हैं, बीकर में डालने के बाद पानी डालते हैं और उसको काफी टाइम तक रखते हैं, और काफी टाइम तक रखने के बाद सैंड जो बॉटम में सेटल डाउन हो जाती है, then this is called sedimentation. And then water is poured out, water को अलग कर देते हैं, then this is called decantation. And then this is called decantation, sedimentation and decantation. And then water remains in the beaker, then this is called, then water, then when the seawater is, this water contains the salt, and then we will heat the salt water, And when we heat the salt water, then what is the remaining in the beaker? Then salt remains into the beaker and it evaporates. So this is the activity 7. How can we separate sand and salt? सैंड एंड सोल्ट को पहले पानी में डालना है, पानी में डालने के बाद सैंड सेटल डाउन हो जाएगी, दिस इज कॉल्ड सेडिमेंटेशन. और वाटर को अलग कर लेना है एंड सैंड को अलग कर लेना है. और वाटर में जो है सोल्ट प्रेजेंट है, इसको हीट करेंगे एंड बिकॉज ऑफ इवेपोरेशन it evaporates and what is remaining in the beaker? Salt. So this is the method how can we separate sand and salt. And next is, now we need to separate sand and salt, sand and water from the decanting liquid and then transfer these liquid to a kettle and close its lid. So firstly, now we need to separate sand and salt from the decanting liquid. So and then salt solution is remaining in the liquid, and then we will transfer these liquid to a kettle and we will close this with the lid and heat the liquid with the for some time as shown in the figure 5.13. Firstly, we will heat this mixture and then notice steam coming out from the spout of the kettle, and take a metal plate with some ice on it and hold the plate just above the spout of the kettle as shown in the figure 5.13. And what do you observe? Let all the water in the kettle boil off. Firstly, we will take a metal plate and with some ice on it and hold the plate just above the spout of the kettle as shown in the figure 5.13. So firstly, we will take a metal plate with some ice on it. So in the figure, we are taking a metal plate as shown in the figure 5.13. We are taking a metal plate with some ice on it. So we are putting some ice on it and we are taking a metal plate and hold the metal just above the spout of the kettle as shown in the figure. And we are putting the liquid in the kettle and then we are heating it as shown in the figure 5.13. And when the steam comes in contact with the metal plate and cooled with the ice, and it condenses and it forms liquid. And what do you mean by condensation? When the water vapor converts into the liquid form, so this is called condensation. So what do you mean by condensation? The process of conversion of water vapor into liquid is called condensation. So what do you mean by condensation? The process of conversion of water vapor into its liquid form is called condensation. Did you ever see water drops condensed under a plate that has been used to cover a vessel containing milk that has been boiled? And after all the water has evaporated, and what is left behind in the kettle? So what do you mean by condensation? The process of conversion of water vapor into its liquid form is called condensation. And when these water vapor is converted into the liquid form, so this phenomena is called condensation as shown in the figure 5.13. So in the figure 5.13, evaporation and condensation phenomena is taking place. Firstly, we will heat the liquid. Then when we heat the liquid, then this will change into the water vapor. And then this water vapor come contact with the ice. Then this water vapor is converted into the liquid. So in the figure 5.13, पहले हम जो mixture है water को हम heat करते हैं, heat करने के बाद water vapor बनते हैं. This is called evaporation. And when these water vapor comes in contact with the ice, as shown in the figure, then these water vapor changes into the liquid, and this is called condensation. So this is called condensation. So this is the phenomena of condensation. Did you ever see water drops condensed under a plate that has been used to cover a vessel containing milk that has been just has been boiled? And after all the water has evaporated, and what is left behind in the kettle? We have thus separated salt, sand, and water using process of decantation, filtration, evaporation, and condensation. So what do you mean by condensation? The process of conversion of water vapor into liquid form is called condensation. And did you see water drops condensed under a plate that has been used to cover a vessel containing milk that has been boiled? As we see, when we boil the milk and when we put plate on the milk, then the water droplets comes on the plate, and after all the water that has been evaporated, and what is left behind in the beaker. So in the figure 5.13, what is the phenomena occur? Evaporation and condensation. Evaporation and condensation phenomena is occurring in the figure 5.13. Paheli faced a problem while recovering salt mixed with the sand. She has mixed up a packet of salt in a small amount of sand, and then she then tried the method suggested in the activity 7 to recover the salt, and she found, however, that she could recover only a small part of the salt and that she had taken, and what could have gone wrong. So this is the activity to show the phenomena of evaporation and condensation. And next topic is, can water dissolve any amount of substance? Is any amount of substance is dissolved into the water? In the chapter 4, we found that many substances dissolve into the water and it forms a solution. As we know, in the chapter 4, there are so many substances dissolved into the water and it forms a solution. And we say that these substances are soluble in water, and what will happen if we go on adding more and more of these substances to a fixed amount of the water. As we know, in the chapter 4, what we have studied, we found that so there are so many substances dissolved into the water, and when these substances dissolve into the water, then these makes a solution. When we add salt into the water, then this will make a salt solution. And when we add the sand into the solution into the water, then it makes the sand solution. So when we say that these substances are soluble into the water. And when these substances dissolve into the water, then this is called soluble into the water. What will happen if we go on adding more and more of these substances to a fixed amount of the water? So if we add some substance into the water, and what is happening? So we will study this in the activity 8. So for solving activity 8, you will need a beaker or a small pan or a spoon and salt and water, and pour half a cup of water into the beaker. So firstly, you will need a beaker and you need a small pan and a small spoon and small salt and the water. Firstly, you need a beaker and you need a small pan and you need a spoon and salt and water. And then we will add half a cup of water into the beaker. And then add 1 teaspoonful of salt and stir it well. Firstly, we will take a beaker. Firstly, we will take a beaker or a small pan, and then we will add spoon, salt, and water. Pour half a cup of water to the beaker. So, firstly, we will add pour half a cup of water into the beaker and add 1 teaspoonful of salt. So then we will add 1 teaspoonful of salt, and until the salt dissolves completely, again add a teaspoonful of salt and stir well and go on adding salt 1 teaspoonful at a time and stir. So what is the activity 8? Firstly, you will need a beaker or a small pan or a spoon and salt and water. and then we will pour half a cup of water into the beaker. So firstly, you will need a beaker and or a small pan or a small spoon or the salt and water, and then we will add half a cup of water into the beaker and add 1 teaspoonful of salt and stir it well and until the salt dissolve completely, and again add a teaspoonful of salt and stir well. And then we will add salt 1 teaspoon at a time and stir, and then we will stir it. And after adding few spoons of salt, do you find that some salt remains undissolved? And this is settled down at the bottom. If yes, this means that no more salt can be dissolved into the amount of water, and this type of solution is called saturated solution. So what do you mean by saturated solution? Firstly, we will take a beaker and then we will add some salt into it, and then we will dissolve this salt with the help of spoon, and then this will dissolve into the beaker, and after dissolving, when this dissolve into the beaker, the what is remaining in the beaker, then this makes a salt solution. And then we will add some more salt into it, then this will not, then that if we will add some salt into it, then this will not dissolve into the beaker. And this is called saturated solution. If yes, these mean that no more salt can be dissolved into water, then this type of solution is called saturated solution. हम पहले beaker लेंगे, beaker में अगर हम पहले पानी लेंगे, water लेंगे, then we will add some sugar into it or salt into it. And जब उसमें हम sugar और salt डालेंगे, then we will dissolve it with the help of spoon. Then the all salt or all this substance is dissolved into the water, and then we will add more salt. Then this will not dissolve into the water. So this type of solution is called saturated solution. So what do you mean by saturated solution? The solution in which we cannot add more salt. We cannot add more salt is called saturated solution. Here is a hint as to what might have gone wrong when Paheli tried to recover large amount of salt mixed with the sand, and perhaps the amount of salt was much more than the required to form a saturated solution, and the undissolved salt would have remained mixed with the sand and could not be recovered. She could solve her problem by using a larger amount of water. Suppose she did not have sufficient quantity of water to dissolve all the salt in the mixture. Is there some way that water could be made to dissolve more salt before the solution gets saturated? So this is the figure 5.14. This is a saturated solution. There is a hint to might have gone wrong when Paheli tried to recover large amount of salt mixed with the sand. Perhaps the quantity of salt was much more than the required to form a saturated solution, and the undissolved salt would have remained fixed with the sand and could not be recovered. And she could solve her problem by using a larger amount of water. So if this will not dissolve into the water, then we will add some water into it, then more salt can be added into the water. Suppose she did not have sufficient quantity of water to dissolve all the salt in the mixture. Is there some way that water could be made to dissolve more salt before the solution gets saturated? So what do you mean by saturated solution? The solution in which no more salt or sand or the sugar is added, then this type of solution is called saturated solution. So in the next lecture, we will study about the activity 9 and activity 10. So you have to learn what do you mean by condensation, and what do you mean by what is the method of separation. This is the activity 7 you have to learn. And what do you mean by evaporation, and what do you mean by saturated solution, So if you have any query regarding this topic, you can ask. So if you have any query regarding this topic, you can ask. If you have any query regarding this topic, you can ask. Akash sir, please unmute students. If you have any query regarding this topic, you can ask. Yes. If you have any query regarding this topic, you can ask. Raise your hands. Akash sir, please unmute students. So what we